Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Empowered to Live, where faith meets purpose and purpose fuels freedom. I'm your host, Andrea Rose Butler, and we're going to be talking about a topic again, like I always said every week, that I'm always the first partaker of whatever it is that we're going to be discussing. And today we're going to talk about boundaries and the power of boundaries and their purpose in guarding our purpose, guarding our peace, and setting us up for success. And when I was thinking about this, um, I remember a time where, and sometimes I still do that. I was talking with a friend yesterday about, I moved to Mexico to kind of give myself some window because I was overwhelmed. I was tired. When I say I was tired, to the tiredness that I felt like, some days I was like, Lord, I'm just done. I'm just done. I don't I'm I was just so tired. And I said I moved here. One of the things was initially I said, well, because I was so tired, I said when we get here, I'm gonna take a couple of weeks. I'm going to rest. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I did none of those things. We hit the ground running. We started volunteering with an organization. We started doing stuff, and we just kept on moving. And then as I was sharing with my friend yesterday, I was telling her, I said, I was starting here probably next month, um, an in-person Bible study. I teach Bible study online at my church in Virginia. I teach Sunday school. I'm working on a discipleship program. We started some impact work with my foundation. I'm here. As we had an event last weekend, and out of that, the needs that came out of that, I'm like, okay, so we need to do this, and I need to do that. I'm back in school, and so much stuff. And I was like, okay, guys, I thought I was gonna come and give myself some space to breathe, And so when I was talking to her, she said, I thought you said you were going to cut back. You were just picking up more stuff. And I was like, yeah, but at least I'm not working like, 8 to 12 or 14 hours a day. I've got some more time. I've got a little bit more time. And she's like, yeah, but you're filling it with a whole bunch of stuff, because I was also teaching at a Bible college. I was just doing a whole lot of stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to learn, and I'm still learning how to say no to things and protecting my peace. But I feel like the things that I'm doing, I know they're in line with my purpose. So I don't feel that overwhelmed like I did before. And so I know that I'm in the right direction, doing the things that I am supposed to be doing. But you may not be in that space but you may be feeling that you're in that place of overwhelm where you're feeling done in. And how do we set those boundaries in place? And the things that I have learned and am learning are that boundaries, they're not selfish, and don't let anyone guilt you into feeling guilty when you say no. And every time I find myself doing something like that, I remember a friend of mine used to say to me, because I was like, people say, oh, can you do this? Yes. Can you do that? Yes. Can you do that? Yes. And I'm just filling up my plate, filling up my calendar with stuff. And she was like, you need to learn how to say no. And she goes, let's practice no. And she was like, did the world stop? And did anyone die? And I was like, no, no one died. The world didn't end. None of those things happened. But I was feeling guilty by saying no, because I felt like they asked me to do it. And so they trusted me to do it. And so therefore I needed to do it, even though I didn't have the bandwidth to do it. And I'm also, because of my perfectionist nature, I wanted things to be done well. So not only was I living outside of my margins and doing stuff outside of my margins, and I was burning the midnight oil and doing all the stuff, and I shared before about, a time when I was doing so much that my body said, I'm enough. And I passed out because I was just so exhausted, and it was just so much stuff going on. I was, some of the things I was doing, that my body was just like, enough is enough. If you won't say no, I will say no for you. And I don't want that to be your story where your body says to you no and stops. We want you to have that, long and healthy life, but we've got to learn how to say no and mean no. And so when we look at, so why do you need boundaries? Boundaries are protection. They are protecting your peace, they're protecting your energy, they're protecting your God given assignment. And so it's okay for us to say no. And I'm learning now when somebody asks me stuff and I'm like, that's not really part of my ministry or part of my journey. So those are two of the things that I've put into my vocabulary when somebody says and asks me things. And I was like, or I give myself pause to not just jump right in and say yes, but to say, let me think about that and let me get back to you and let me see if I have the bandwidth for it. And so sometimes because I know me, I needed to be able to say that and not automatically say yes in that moment. And I think when you have that step back moment, it's kind of like when I go shopping, I will see things and I say, oh, I like that. And I'll put it in my cart and I'll walk around the store and I was like, okay, you like it? But is it something that you really need? Or is it that you just want this right now because it looks good or whatever the reason? And I will walk around the store with it in the cart. And then I was like, you know what? I really don't need this. And so I'll go and put it back. And I think sometimes when we try to set those boundaries in place, that sometimes you have to give yourself that space to step back and do the walk around the store. So, let me pray about it. Let me think about it. And give an answer at a later date and time. So if you're like me, one of those people that don't know how to say no, that may be an option for you. And so we're going to talk about some other ways to set boundaries and how to clarify what your boundaries are, why you need them. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But there's those things that came to my mind about the reason why they are so important. So we need that again, they boundaries are like the fence in your garden. They not only keep things out, but they keep things in, like your peace, your joy, your purpose, your energy. And so when you're wasting your time on things that don't align with where you're going or where God has you going or what your purpose is or the journey that you're on, and people will try to fill your plate up for you. And so you have to recognize for yourself what is that important thing for you so that you can take that step back. And so like Proverbs 4:23 says, above all things, all else, guard your heart because out of it everything flows. So when you guard your heart, it's like guarding your boundaries, because when we do things that are crushing our boundaries and limiting our purpose, then we can sometimes. So some of the signs of that is that you say yes, but then you're resented. You feel bad because you said yes to something that you knew you couldn't do. And then you feel bad about it. You maybe even resent the fact that they're always asking me. And, you have this negative self-thought that's going on. I wish I had said no. I don't know why I always say, and then you find yourself having those conversations with yourself after you said yes. Your boundaries are too loose and you may need to set better boundaries. You feel anxious about checking your emails or your text messages because you're like, oh my God, someone's going to ask me to do something and I don't really have time to do that. I don't feel like I can take anything else on it. Your calendar is full, but your soul is empty. That was me. Got a lot of stuff going on, and I was just like, I was so exhausted mentally, spiritually, because I was taking on so much stuff that I didn't really have time to rest. And so it was just draining everything out of me, but I felt like I couldn't say no. And so it's important for me now and for you to learn how to say no, to look at your calendar and say, what do I have going? Somebody asks me stuff now and I'm just like, let me check my calendar. And I have to schedule in for myself rest time. I have to make myself rest because what I would do is somebody would ask me something. I had work, and the next day I would be up at night to 12, 1, 2 o'clock working on something because I didn't have time to do it, and I wanted to get it done because I gave my word. And so then I would be exhausted the next day for work, and then I was like, I still had other stuff going, and so it was just so soul draining for me. And I know for a lot of you, that's what's happening to you. You feel responsible for everyone else's emotions or their approval. You know, that's not your job. And again, lesson for me, it's not my job to gatekeep everyone's emotions and pander for their approval. And go take a look at who my identity is. And so we did a whole episode on my identity. And so you are regularly abandoning your own goals or rest to take on somebody else's work. And so when you put your stuff aside and you're like, oh, I needed this for myself, I needed to get this done for me, but I've taken on somebody else's stuff, and everybody's just coming to you, but you never find yourself, and then when you ask for help, you don't always get it reciprocated. That also breeds that resentment that we feel when it's not reciprocated and we're not getting that for ourselves, and our dreams and our goals fall by the wayside, and we're like, well, when I do this for this person, then I will pick up my this. I'll walk into my purpose when I finish doing this for this person, or I'll do my dream when after I do all of these things, and then people will take, and then you find yourself at the end never really being fulfilled in what you needed to do to fulfill your purpose in the earth. So you still got to lay your brick. And if you're not able to do that, somebody else behind you is waiting for you to be able to step in and do what they needed to do. But you haven't done what you needed to do because you've been doing somebody else's stuff instead of your own stuff. And so it's important. So boundaries they're biblical, you know, they are loving for us to have boundaries. So loving not only ourselves, but loving other people as well. They're necessary for healthy relationships, because if you're feeling resentful of the people around you because you're taking on all this other stuff and then you're resenting them, your relationships aren't healthy. So you want to make sure that you're doing that. And they're a tool for obedience and stewardship. So you be able to, again, you have your purpose that you need to fulfill. And sometimes it may be in helping someone else, but it shouldn't always be that you don't feel the same fulfillment when you're doing somebody else's work. It's almost like, you're at work and you have that person who doesn't really work, and you find yourself doing not only your work, but their work. How does that make you feel? The same way when we don't have boundaries and we don't know how to say no, that's that same feeling that you get. And then, every time you see somebody coming and you get an anxiety of, oh my God, they're going to ask me to do something else, and I really can't take on anything else. But, then we breathe and then we do it anyway. And then we feel that same, and this is a whole cycle that needs to be broken. So what boundaries are not, they're not mean. It's not mean for you to say, I really can't do this right now. I can't take anything else on. No, I can't do this. No, I'm sorry, I can't, so it's okay for, no is a complete sentence. And it's not mean when you do that. It's about, again, guarding your heart, guarding your purpose, guarding, your goals that you have. It's not unchristlike. So don't let someone say to you, well, that's not Christ-like for you to take on these things. And you can remind them about Mary and Martha. Jesus came to Mary and Martha's house, and Martha was so busy taking on all the burdens of all this other stuff. And Jesus had to remind her, Martha, you're concerned about a whole lot of stuff. You got a whole lot of stuff that you took on. But the one thing that's important is for you to come and sit with me. And so when somebody tries to guilt you or gaslight you into saying, I take on this stuff, from that moment, that it's not of God for them to do that. And so it's not Christ-like. And so don't let somebody tell you that it's not Christ-like for you to take on stuff like that. It's not a wall to keep everyone out. So it's not about blocking people from your life and not connecting with people. It's any of those things. but it's about how do we guard ourselves, guard our hearts, keep ourselves from resentment and bitterness from growing into our hearts. And so, because if you do it and it's not in a loving way, and you feel that resentment, you feel that bitterness, it's best for you not to have done it at all, because it is just breeding more bitterness, and that root is going to grow inside of you. So to let that go, and it's not punishment. You're not punishing anyone. It's not punishment for you either to take that on. So just be mindful of that as well. So even Jesus modeled boundaries. He would pull away from people and go away to pray. He would slip through the crowds when the crowds were gathering around him and they wanting stuff. There's a couple of scriptures where he slipped through the crowds and he disappeared, and they're like, they're looking for him. Even the disciples, he got away from them sometimes. Because he was just like, I need those places. I need that boundary. I need to set these things in place. I need that time to refresh myself, in order, because as you're pouring out and pouring out, if you're not filling yourself because you have no boundaries, you will be dry and just empty. And so you need those boundaries in order for you to be able to refresh and to heal yourself and replenish your mind and replenish your body. I did a whole segment on self-care and the Sabbath rest. God gave us a Sabbath rest for a reason. And part of that Sabbath rest is about setting those healthy boundaries. No, so not really. So some of the areas that you need to set boundaries in, sometimes it's relationships. You don't owe everyone access to your life. Everyone should not, you shouldn't be filling up your life with a whole bunch of people and stuff. And so it's okay. So everyone should not have access to you at all times. Sometimes you have children and they're younger or whatever. I've got adult kids, and sometimes I was talking to my cousin, and I told her, I said, and I'm taking care of my mom who's aged and all this stuff. And I said, we all live in the same house. And I said, sometimes I come to my room, I close my door, and I'm in here. And I said, that's for me, and sometimes I just lay across my bed and I'm just like, I need to woosah, I need to get away. And so to come in and just kind of shut the door and sometimes just put music on and just kind of get that time for myself to be able to separate myself from all the stuff that's going on and have that moment to just lay down and to just rest, to just listen to that soothing music and just kind of relax my soul is important. And so even though we all live in the same home, they don't always need 24/7 access to you. Even if you have young kids, when my girls were younger, I would, hey, let's everybody take some rest, get a book and sit down and read, or take a nap, or whatever you need to do. Let's just take that moment to just kind of find that space for you. And so set limits on draining conversations. So if people are draining you and you're just like, oh my God, I can't. And you have those relationships that are draining, you may have to set limits and limitations on, again, you don't owe everyone access to yourself. And so you may need to set those boundaries with people. Set boundaries with your time and energy. Schedule some white space. Like I said, there's that book called Margins, and he talks about that. When you find yourself writing your life and you're going all out the margins and you just everywhere and there's no space for you to breathe, you know that boundaries are needed for you, because you need that time to replenish yourself, like I just said, to replenish your energy, to refresh your soul. Especially if you're a caregiver, it's so important for you to set some boundaries in place to take care of yourself. That Sabbath time, that Sabbath rest. And it doesn't have to be on Sundays. It could be whenever you set some time aside, whether it's an hour a week, to just kind of get some time to yourself, go for a walk by yourself, maybe go out and get some coffee and, and sit with your headphones in and just kind of, or go to the park or go to a lake or do something that is refreshing to your soul and to your spirit, that fills you back up. Say no to the urgent so you can say yes to what's important. Everybody's urgent need is not your responsibility. And so that's a lesson that I had to learn. You created a problem for yourself, and now you need me to fix it. And so it's important to you, but it's not an urgent thing, because you knew, like, somebody would say, well, I have this deadline. Well, when did you know about it? Oh, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, but it's due tomorrow. And so you need me to drop what I'm doing to go ahead and do your work that you failed to do. You know, again, those kinds of things breed resentment. If somebody doesn't show up or not show up where they should. And so sometimes you have to say, you know what, it's just going to have to fail. Well, that's going to be on you. And that's a lesson that you have to learn, because you can't go in and rescue everyone. You're not the savior. And so you have to recognize that as well. And sometimes that your boundaries may need to be that I am not everyone's salvation, that you did not die on the cross for them, and you're not able to save them. And sometimes people need that moment to fall in order for them to grow. And you can't always come in to rescue. And so you have to set those boundaries with your time and energy, that you cannot be the catch all for everyone. And so you also need to set boundaries with yourself. I think that I had to learn. So stop overworking to prove your worth. And I think that was, for me, I think my biggest thing, that I was doing these things to make myself feel better. But I realized that in doing so, I was hurting myself more. And it wasn't, people still didn't really value me. And so I had to learn to value myself by saying no, by setting those boundaries and saying, you know what, I really can't take anything else on. I really can't do this. I can't, no. And so give yourself permission to rest without guilt. I told you, sometimes I just come in here and I'm just like, I need about 5 minutes to just come in and just, get my brain and my mind together, because there's so many things that I'm doing, and they're important things, and they're things that I love. But sometimes we need those times to rest, to replenish, and speak kindly to yourself. That's a boundary you need to say. Well, what are the things you're saying about yourself? How are you talking to yourself? And then if you mess up, so set those boundaries where I'm going to speak lovingly to myself. I'm going to speak kind to myself, and being kind to yourself is sometimes saying no, and setting that expectation that this is not going to happen. So, what are some ways that you can set boundaries? So, clarify your core values. So, what are you protecting? What are you guarding? What needs to be guarded? And is it your purpose? Is it your time with God? Your goals. Um, you know, your health, because sometimes even though our health is suffering, but we still keep pushing, and we don't have those boundaries, and your body is breaking down, but you refuse to set those boundaries to protect yourself. Communicate clearly and kindly. Like I said, sometimes you may have to say, no, I won't be able to do that. And if they say, well, why not? Because I won't be able to do that at this time. But I appreciate you thinking about me. And sometimes that may have to be your reason. And you don't have to give, again, access. If you're saying, I don't have the bandwidth to take this on, and somebody keeps pushing, which is one of those things that happens, you have to train and retrain people, because they got used to you saying yes. And so you have to retrain them when you're learning to say no, because you're learning to set those boundaries up for yourself, that protection. Hold the line. If you don't hold the line, think of yourself as a linebacker, that you're trying to, not get them to push past, the lines, and they're holding that line, and they're putting everything into it, because people are going to push back, and they're going to want to know why you always say yes. And so maybe now I'm in a season where my word is no. And so that's my season right now. No, I can't do it. I don't really owe you an explanation, because no, I can't do it. And be able to hold that, because then it just becomes a suggestion. When you say no and they push back, and you're like, oh, wait, never mind. Yeah, I'll go ahead and take. And then we breed that whole cycle of resentment again. So we want to make sure that we are doing that. So we'll, again, prepare for the pushback, and then pray for strength. That's got to help you because when when you're trying to change habits, it's going to take God's strength to help you to keep those habits in place. So, praying about, you know, give me strength when they push back, when they're like, why? And then we want to retreat back and we step back across our own line. We say, I'm drawing a line in the sand, I'm going to stand here. And then somebody pushes, and then you step back and you allow them to keep getting to you. And then you find yourself back into that place of resentment and bitterness, and you're angry and all of these things that happen because you're overwhelmed and you're you're feeling this, but you keep saying yes. And so again, boundaries are healthy. They're not unchristlike. They're for your protection. They guard your peace. They guard your purpose, your energy, your joy, your health, all of those things. It's about guarding them. You said guarding with diligence. That means you've got to be on guard at all times, diligently watching, protecting that you're on patrol, and asking the Holy Spirit to help you in those moments when you just have to say, Lord, give me the words to say when they ask me about doing XYZ. Lord, help me say, give me the words that I need to say so that I will be a better steward of your word, and to be a steward of my time and a steward of my purpose and all the things that you have called me to. And so I want to issue a challenge to you. And I try to do this every week, to try to issue a challenge to you. What's one area of your life where you need boundaries to be set in place? What's one thing you can do? So where is your boundaries too loose? And then set one clear boundary and keep it. So what's something that you can do today, or tomorrow? You need that practice of being able to say no. If somebody's already asked you and you're hesitant about saying yes, and you're questioning whether or not you should say it, and you're already thinking they're already asked you, and in your mind you're already going, I really can't do this. I don't know what I'm going to do. I really can't take anything. This is your practice to say, you know what? I really cannot take anything else on. And maybe you may need to write a script out, practice that script, use Chat GPT or one of those other AI software to say, help me write a script in order to set boundaries. What's something I can say if I'm asked this question, and then if I get pushed back, what should I say? And then practice it and keep practicing, you know, practicing and keep practicing. They say practice makes perfect, but Dale Carnegie says practice makes permanent. It doesn't make it perfect, but it makes it permanent. If we keep doing something over and over again, it becomes permanent. It becomes a habit. And you don't necessarily need perfection, but you need permanence. And then permanence is in saying and learning how to say no. Say no lovingly, say no kindly, and then guarding yourself, guarding your heart, guarding your peace, guarding all of those things. And remember, you need to be refreshed. And if somebody, again, if you get that pushback, you say, you know what, Jesus went away, and Jesus said no. Jesus said no to a lot of stuff that he was asked to do, because he was just like, it was not part of my purpose. It was not part of his purpose. And just like the things you're being asked to do may not be a part of your purpose either. But if you don't know what your purpose is, that may be a starting place for you. If you're unsure about your purpose, your why, when you go to YouTube and watch those episodes that I talked about, those, how to discover your why, and how then to walk in that so that you know what is in alignment with your journey. What's a part of your, that's no longer part of my ministry. Sometimes we get caught up in things that we said yes to, and we're in this place where we feel stuck, but we recognize that I'm doing this, but it's not, my calling. I remember one time at church, somebody was asking me, don't you want to be a trustee? Money, finances, counting, math? No, absolutely not. And I had to tell her, I said, nope. I said, no, you don't want me in there. I don't like math. That is not a part of my ministry. Doing finance, I do not want to be a trustee. Absolutely not. I was already doing a bunch of stuff, and somebody was trying to add other stuff, and I had to say no. I was like, absolutely not. I said, no, ma'am. Love you, but no. Love you, but no. Being a trustee is not my thing. And so we got to learn, how to say that, and to find the ways to do it, that we can again communicate with kindness but still be firm and hold that line. And so we have to recognize that thing about ourselves, about what it is that I'm called to do and what is my purpose. So if that's you and you just need some more help in how to set those boundaries and how to do that, send me a message and we can talk about how to do that. If you need prayer and you need me to pray with you about, you're having a hard time in setting those boundaries, again, just send me a message and say, hey, I need, and pray for me because I'm having difficulties with this. This is an area of weakness for me and an area of opportunity for me to grow in, because like I said, for me, I'm also growing in this area. I've come a long way because I was always saying yes, saying yes, saying yes, saying yes. And, till I got to that place where I felt myself becoming resentful of, because I said yes when I knew I should have said no. And I was having those difficult conversations with myself after the fact. It's kind of like when somebody says something to you, and then when you get home, you're like, I should have told her this, and I should have said this. Yeah. So again, if that's you, you're struggling. I pray that God gives you the strength to set those boundaries up, to protect your peace, to protect your energy, to protect your joy, protect your health, and that you can fully walk into the purpose for which you were called and created for and to be. And so again, I thank you all for joining me for another episode of Empowered to Live. Until next time, keep walking in faith, living in freedom, and pressing forward or pursuing fulfillment, because that's what God wants us to be. He wants us to have that fulfilled life once He came, that we may have life and that life abundantly. So again, thank you, and I'll see you all next week. Have a great night.